We're pleased today to have Ms. Rosalyn Cotton with us. Ms. Cotton currently serves as the chair of the Nebraska Board of Parole. It's a position she has had for a little more than 3 years, December of 2014, so 3.5 years. She has served on the Nebraska Parole Board for more than a dozen years, just the last 3 as the chair of the Board of Parole. Prior to this time, she has served in a number of capacities, including work as a corrections officer, as a parole officer, and today as a speaker. Ms. Cotton has a master's degree in urban studies and criminal justice. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to say thank you to Professor Eskridge for having me here this afternoon. I appreciate all the faculty and the students that are here. I really like the podium, but I think I need to move around so that I can get your undivided attention. As Mr. Eskridge stated that, my name is Rosalyn Cotton, I'm the chair of the Parole Board. And one of the things I'm going to share with you today is, first of all, I'm very windy. I love to talk. So I'm going to try to limit a lot of things only because of the time. So please feel free if there's anything that you need to ask. I'll speak with you across the hall when we're finished. If you want to interrupt, feel free to do that as well. I've been on the board for many years, and one of the things I will say to you is it's a passion of mine. I care about the victims. I care about the individuals. One of the things I'm going to share with you today is you're going to hear me say a lot of things about individuals. For the last 1.5 years, I have been really working hard to get away from the mentality of utilizing the terminology of inmates and offenders. I like individuals because those are the people that we're working with and trying to serve every day. So we work with a lot of these individuals every single day. I will say to you that we probably look at maybe over 300 cases plus a month. And that includes individuals that are on review status, individuals that come back before us on parole review, revocation, and also hearings. Today we're in hearings. The last 2 weeks of the month, we have hearings scheduled, and we basically go to 10 institutions. For many of you, you probably know that there are 10 institutions in the state of Nebraska. If you don't, I'm going to name them for you. We have the Work Ethic Camp out of McCook, Nebraska. We have the Diagnostic Evaluation Center, Lincoln Correctional Center, Nebraska State Penitentiary, Community Corrections in Lincoln, Community Corrections in Omaha, the Omaha Correctional Center, and then we have the youth facility that's out of Omaha as well, and then we have the the actual women's facility out of York. We actually go to each and every one of those facilities except for McCook. And we do video conference with McCook for reviews, and then they actually transport those individuals that we set for hearings. They bring them down to community corrections here in Lincoln. I've been commuting back and forth to Lincoln probably for the last 13 years. I love the commute, except for the fact that I've probably went through 3 vehicles in the last 5 or 6 years. But again, I enjoy the work. And what our work consists of is face-to-face contact with each and every individual that we work with. If they choose not to visit with us, they waive their appearance. That's for reviews, and that's for hearings, and that's for actually revocation hearings. I am going to go through you each component of what we do every single day. The first 2 weeks of the month, we actually review each individual who's been sentenced to the Department of Correctional Services. The Department of Correctional Services and the Board of Parole are 2 separate agencies. We actually are partners, and we rely on the Department of Correctional Services to provide us with the assessments that are going to help us get these individuals programmed and ready for transition. So we may see individuals the first 45 days of their actual parole review. Once they come see us, we at that time make the decision on whether we're going to parole those individuals. One of the things that I will say to you is that our mission is public safety. And so while we're looking at those reviews, we are literally trying to make the decision as to whether we're going to consider them for hearings. Those reviews are very, very important to us because what happens is, based off the assessments that the Department of Correctional Services will provide us, they will make sure that they get into the programming that they need to have prior to their transition. So let me give you an example. If we visit with a sex offender the first 45 days of that particular process, there's a possibility, not always, that they will be assessed for sex offender treatment. At that particular time, we rely for the Department of Correctional Services to get them into the programming that they need, and the parole board will continue to work with them based on the completion of that program. And then at that particular time, the board will make the decision as to whether they're going to be considered for parole. Once we see these individuals, there's a possibility that they may be transferred to a facility based on the level of custody. So whether they go from the Diagnostic Evaluation Center to work release or Diagnostic Evaluation Center to the Nebraska State Penitentiary, at one way or the other, they will be transferred according to the Department of Correctional Services level of treatment or level of custody. Then once we have hearings, and during the last 2 weeks of the hearings, we actually consider those individuals that come before us for reviews, we will consider them for a hearing and possibly transition to the community. One of the things I need to emphasize, because we have individuals that get confused by this, if they are not eligible for parole, we can consider them, but we will make a hearing date effective to that parole eligibility date, because by law, we cannot parole them prior to their parole eligibility date. For example, if John Doe has a hearing set for today, and it's March 26th, and his eligibility date is not till April 1st of 2018, he cannot parole until April 1st of 2018. That's when he walks out the door. In the meantime, he will basically sit until that date comes up for him to leave. So on hearings, we take everything into consideration for that hearing that day. We may look at programming. Have you completed the programming? I will give you an example. Today we were at the Nebraska State Penitentiary, and we had about 8 cases that were coming to us from the residential treatment program, a residential treatment program that's long-term in the facility. And out of the 8 individuals, 6 of those individuals have completed the residential program. They're parole eligible, and they were able to leave today if they have a residence that has been approved, because they have to have a residence that's approved as well. They work with re-entry on those residents and parole administration on those residents. What I will say to you is that if we have victims that may show up at these hearings, the board will consider paroling them or may consider not to parole them. Because one of the things that we have learned is that during a PSI, all of that information may not be provided to us. But when victims come before us and testify against a hearing, we take those testimonies seriously, because that may be information that we did not have when we set the hearing. So those kinds of things happen. It's very, very important for us to recognize the seriousness of the crime as well as the victims that show up before hearings. Once the person has been paroled, we have parole administration, who is currently now under the Board of Parole. We have approximately 66 individuals under the parole administration. Prior to July 1st of 2016, the parole board had 10 staff, 5 of them board members and 5 administrative staff. Now we have a total of approximately 77 people that work for the Board of Parole. Parole administration is responsible for supervision and services of those individuals that we parole. And it's very important because we communicate very well. It's important for the board to literally make sure that the individuals who are parolees are basically getting the type of programming or services that they need while they're on parole. Parole officers work very well with our individuals, our parolees, and I will say to you, for the record, we have an excellent staff. So parole officers will work with those parolees and basically give them the level of treatment services as well as community type supervision while they're on parole. Also, once violations start to come and individuals start to violate their parole, we are taking a very, very strong positive interest in trying to work with these individuals as opposed to bringing them back for revocation. As you all know, we're trying to work on basically getting individuals out on parole, and at the same time, we're trying to watch that whole recidivism that is part of the mission. And by doing that, the parole officers will work with these individuals on what they need to keep them out of trouble and keep them in the community. At no means is that if there's a possibility that those individuals are in violation, the board sees a need that they need to return before the board, we will take a look at them. But right now, we're really working at trying to utilize custodial sanctions and other services that are going to help these individuals stay out. Most of the time, when things like that happens and something goes south with these individuals not following their conditions of parole, then we will be notified. So we have different individuals on parole for different offenses, and we work with them all. So for the most part of it, when we look at reviews for setting hearings, when we look at hearings for trying to transition, and those individuals that have been paroled, the supervisors and the parole officers who work with them to the best of their needs and level of care while they're in the community, and then we continue to go through that whole process every single month. I will tell you, it's very interesting. I have learned a lot in this capacity because when I was a parole officer, it was a little bit more different because at that particular time, we didn't focus on services. We focused on basically bringing them back and having them go through that whole process all over again. And then hopefully, if they had an opportunity to parole again, they paroled. Majority of the time, those individuals mandatorily discharged because if they come back on additional charges, it's hard for them to get back out depending on their sentence structure. So we really worked very hard in bringing them back then, but it's a new day. Today, this day, 21st century, we're working hard to try to keep them out so we can try to transition them and get them the best help that they can so that they can be successful and not come back to prison. That's where we're at with the process. I will tell you, students, I always like to share with you that the criminal justice system is a phenomenal area to work in because guess what? We literally have job security. We always have a place to work. There's 3 components of the criminal justice system. As you all know, law enforcement, courts, and corrections. There's a job on every level, whether it's city, county, state, federal, you have a job if you want to. That's what I like about the system because we have diversity. And I enjoy working in an area where I can help. Believe it or not, yes, there are individuals that need transition. There are individuals that probably are still going to be locked up. There are individuals that need transition from work release to the community, but we work with all different areas and work with different people. So what I'm going to say to you is that based on the whole concept of us paroling individuals, the key is, are we paroling the right individuals for the purpose to serve the public and keep the public safe? And because we partner with the Department of Correctional Services, I think we do a wonderful job just making sure that people are programmed, people get the programming that they need, people are transitioned to work release to get the time in. Believe it or not, we have individuals who say, you know what, I'm very interested in parole right now, but if you could give me 4 or 5 months on work release, we would like to make sure that we do that to accommodate so that they can get the time on work release, save some money, and then transition. And then once they get to parole, we work with them accordingly. I will say that victims to us not only are very important, but they also, believe it or not, really don't understand the process. So we give them the opportunity when they come before us, whether they write us letters in opposition, whether they show up in opposition, we make sure that they understand what the process consists of, because a lot of times they don't really mind people paroling to the communities. They just don't want those individuals paroling to their community or having any contact with their children or their family, or just simply, you know what, put them on electronic monitoring so that we know where they're at, and supervision. So we make sure that they're aware of all those things. We do have electronic monitoring that's going to provide that GPS movement to make sure that the parole officers know where they're at all times, as well as the alcohol monitoring to make sure that they're not consuming alcohol. So those kinds of things help us make them a better individual and also provide the supervision that they need in the community. There's not one individual that we have seen that we have not tried to assist to make them successful. But at the same time, we always have to remember it's totally left up to that individual if they want to change. We just provide them with the tools that they need in order to be successful. And I could tell you stories after stories after stories about individuals who really mean that they want to be successful and they get the help that they need from parole officers. But I will say to you that we sign more certificates of discharge than we see individuals come back on revocation. And that makes me feel good, not only as a citizen of the state of Nebraska, but a member of the parole board and also the staff that works with us. And that says a lot, because I think it's important for everybody in the community to know that we're doing the best that we can to make sure that our communities are safe. So, for the most part, I think more than many want to understand is that this is not an easy task. This is not an easy job. We literally have to take case by case and make that decision if this person is going to be, the best for the community, in the community, and then be successful. So, any questions so far? We have 4 board members. We're all appointed by the governor. We serve 6-year terms, and basically they come from different walks of life, different areas. And I think I would say to you that for the most part of it, I think we're doing a great job at what we do every day. We actually work from, I will speak for myself, 6 o'clock in the morning to sometimes 4, depending on what's going on. And we actually try to answer letters, answer calls, do what it is that needs, because people have questions, and kind of take one day at a time and work with each individual day by day. Any questions? Yes?
What's the difference between when you were just a board member to being the chair? What's your different role?
Well, the chair has the role of administration and operations of the agency. Board members, basically, we all work together and we all make the decision as to whether they're going to parole or not. We have parole reviews with 2 board members, sometimes 3. For the most part, there's 3. It takes 2 votes to set them a hearing, and it takes a quorum of 3 to basically have them paroled. So that would be the difference between the chair and board members. We have a chair, a vice chair, and 3 board members that make the decisions, but the chair basically does the administration operations of the agency. I will say we were at UNO a couple weeks ago. I must say this. It was an excellent, excellent panel. And what I'm going to leave students here thinking about is one of the things I like to stress, besides the fact that it's parole board and all the things that we do for transitioning individuals to the community. Individuals like you who would like to be in the capacity at even one time, whether it's juvenile parole probation, whether it's adult parole probation, whether it's law enforcement, one of the things I'm going to stress, education, education, education. It is really, really, really helpful to be educated as you move through the ranks or as you move through your career in corrections, law enforcement, juvenile probation, whatever you like to be. And the reason why I'm stressing that is because you never know what positions open up, you never know what you're interested in, and you never know who's going to be behind you wanting that same position. So I always like to stress, I understand that you have to do internships here. Very, 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 very helpful. I also want you to know that when you volunteer in places that you're interested in, that's really helpful. I believe in coaching. I believe in mentoring. All those kinds of things, including your education, will get you in places where you would like to be. And don't let me tell you this, because guess what? It is not easy. There are always challenges and barriers, but at the same time, you can overcome them and basically get to the place that you want to be. I stress, set your goals. Find out what you like to do. Educate yourself. If you get your education now, wonderful. Go into the work field. When you get your degree and you get into the work field that you're interested in, I would encourage you to find a mentor, someone that can help you get to where you want to get, what level of programming or what level of education or whatever level of your career you want to go to, so that you can be successful in the field that you want to be in at the time. So those are the kinds of things I like to leave you with, because I think it's important that just because you get your BA degree, your BS degree, whatever education level you are at, to continue on with your goals and your education. I love to mentor. I have had 3 mentees during my career, and I continue to assist students with whether they need papers, whether they need one-on-one context with what you're talking about or what you need to write down in papers, whatever it is that you need. I'm always available if you need any help. Any other questions? Yes.
Are there particular cases that you found that circumstances or types of offenses or cases that tend to be more difficult in making a decision, or vice versa, easier to make?
That's a very good question. The 2 offenses that stand out would be murder cases and sex offender cases. It never fails that those victims show up or write letters. There's one other case that I will never forget. It happened about 3 years ago, where there was a burglary that took place and a lot of expensive things were taken. That victim showed up. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that victims are victims, and any crime that's committed, there are victims. So individuals like to think that if they don't commit violent crimes, then there are no victims. They don't realize that even property crimes, you're still being victimized. So those are the kinds of things we like to make sure that they understand, because they could show up anytime. So when we're having this review, we like to share with them during the review that a victim could show up. And if the victim shows up, what are you going to be prepared to say? Because that's important. Not only is it important to us, it's important to the victim to hear. Are you remorseful for what you did? What have you learned to change your criminal thinking? What are the things that are you going to do to be successful once you transition? They want to hear those things. Sometimes, and I will always speak for myself in an audience like this, is that sometimes I have to ask them, what have you done to warrant us to parole you today? What programs have you completed? One of my greatest questions I like to ask, you completed the long-term residential program. What therapeutic things have you learned from the program? And believe it or not, some people can answer that and some people can't. So you literally have to get them engaged in the conversation during the hearing, so that if victims show up for those crimes, those violent crimes, they're going to be able to explain to the victims, explain if there's any other people there from the public, as to why this board is going to be considering you for parole. And I think that's important. That's a real good question, because a lot of times I think people just think that we just parole people just to be paroling people. But offenses, victims, all those things we have to take into consideration. Their behavior in the institution, their programming, their basic interest, where they're going to parole to, what the reentry program look like? All those kinds of things are taken into consideration when we are looking at possibly setting them for hearings. And they know that. Sometimes I don't think many of them understand, but by the time we get through the review process and they are set a hearing, that's where case management come in with the Department of Correctional Services to help them with that process as they continue to walk through. Any other questions? Good question. I will share with you that I think one of the things that keeps me going and stay focused is the fact that we have a number of individuals that are incarcerated. And it's a concern. And what I can say is at this time, I would like to see more individuals paroled, and we're working as hard as we can to parole those individuals. And it's important enough to know that the prison system is overcrowded, but at the same time, the interest of getting more people paroled is there. It's just that a lot of times as board members, again, speaking for myself, our hands are tied because if the sentence structure does not allow us to parole them, you have individuals there of such, and we have to work with what we have to work with. And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And we do not have any control over what comes in the front door. We do have control on who is going to be paroling that's going out the back door. That's huge for me right now because it is my best interest to make sure that we can parole those individuals who are good candidates, those individuals who need transition, and those individuals who want to be successful. I hear every day it was a mistake, but I will share with you, when I see 55 entries on your criminal history, that's not a mistake. That's criminal thinking. How are we going to change your behavior? How are we going to change your thinking? And how are you going to be successful? Those are the kinds of things that radiate through my mind every single day. And trust me, it is not easy. Every single day is not easy. I think a lot of people think that these kinds of things and positions that we're in are easy, but they're not. If you are a correctional officer, it's not easy. If you are probation or parole officer, it's not easy. If you are law enforcement, it is not easy. But what I will tell you, I take one day at a time. Because if you don't, then sometimes you get lost in trying to look at all those individuals that's coming in the front door that have committed heinous crimes that needs to stay locked up. That's not always true, because if they've done their time, if they've completed their programming, if they have good behavior, and if there is opposition, even if there is opposition, those things have to be taken into consideration. And it is huge for me to make sure that I dot my I's and cross my T's before I make that decision to parole an individual. And one good thing about it is there's 5 board members. I don't make decisions by myself. There's 5 board members individually. We speak on our own behalf and basically try to make the best decision that we can for the interest of public safety. Any other question? Yes.
Does the board ever get information back about kind of overall stats and how many are successful upon release and how many recidivate and go back?
We actually keep some data on our own. The Parole Administration does some of that. For the most part, I would say that majority of that information comes from us, and the Department of Correctional Services work with us as well. So, for instance, I was talking to someone last week about how many of those individuals are participating in certain particular programs in the community. Those sorts of things, yes, we do have information on, and basically we can gather some statistics on those. But if any of that data, it comes from Parole Administration. Any other questions? Well, I'm going to leave you with this. This is always a great opportunity. I literally guest lecture, probably for the most part, at UNO, only because I know more of the professors there. I guest lecture here a couple times, 2 or 3 times. There's a couple people that I know that are teaching here that I come in. Some of you may be familiar with my presence, but I will know that this is kind of like my baby. This is what I like to do. I like to guest lecture. I like to share the information that you're going to need in order for you to move down your career path. Because I didn't have that. I'm first individual to graduate in my family, actually second on my mother's side and the first on my father's side. And believe me, there were trials and tribulations as I went through my undergrad and my graduate, and it was not easy. But I will say to you, if you want to be successful, you will be. You just have to put your mind to it, get your education, and literally lean on your professors. Because guess what? They have the knowledge, just like we do. And then get yourself into the place, whether it's jails, whether it's courts, whether it's law enforcement, and find someone that you can look up to so that you can figure out and gauge where you want to be at and what you want to do. And that's basically what I did. I had one mentor, and guess what? The skies were limited. It was just a matter of trusting, a matter of being patient, and a matter of making sure that you get your degree. And if it takes you 4 or 5 years, that's okay. While you're doing that, find a job that you're interested in so that you can have a flexibility of both. And know that when you are finished, you have the experience, you have the education, and then you have a goal that you would like to accomplish. And that's where my heart is. And I will tell everybody every day, if you see me 5 years from now, I will tell you the same thing. Education, education, education. And if you can, make sure that you find some time to work in that field that you're interested in so that you'll be able to gauge where you want to be at during the time or after the time or during that process of setting that goal that you would like to accomplish. I appreciate giving me the opportunity to be here this afternoon, and I will be more than happy to answer questions when we go across the hall. But if there are no other questions, thank you so much, and you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Some other questions? We chatted about one coming over. I'd like you to address. We have the front end and the back end. How about the intermediate releases? The work release, study release. I had mentioned years ago, I'm an old guy, so I had some prisoners take classes, and I haven't had any take classes in a long time. They were on a study release program. So put you on the spot a bit as the chair.
Excuse me. I will say a couple of those programs have worked out in the past. For me, and again, I always speak for myself, you'll hear me say that all the time, one of the challenges can possibly be your eligibility date for parole. Because what happens is when we set programs up like that, and you start looking at individuals going out, not only to work, but being gone from the facility longer than anticipated, it runs a risk of possibly something happening in the community, and these individuals are not parole eligible. There is a work release program that works very well, and basically these individuals go through the Department of Correctional Services. They have to fill out an application. The Department of Correctional Services will look over the application. They have their criteria, and they have to meet that criteria in order for them to be eligible for work release. The Board of Parole signs off on the work release application. During a period of time while they're on work release, they can do furloughs. But as far as anything other than that, I think it would run a risk of those individuals that are not parole eligible. And they still would have to just kind of go and come back as opposed to being out of the facility for a longer period of time, or just simply going from point A to point B because they have a place to stay, that sort of thing. That goes back to parole, but at the same time, those individuals that are on parole are parole eligible. So there's a big difference. I wish something like that could work, but I think it would be hard because the fact that they are not eligible for parole.
Thank you. Any others?
One more question. So you said you have a 5-member board, and some things only 2 or 3 people review at a time. You split the cases to some
We
extent?
have reviews, and during the reviews, we have 3 board members, sometimes 2, that will go to reviews. Those individuals who are on the review case, on the review desk that day, will look at the cases, and they will make the decision as to whether those individuals are scheduled for hearings. And then once those individuals have been set for those hearings, then the whole board shows up at the hearings, and then they need a quorum of 3 for votes.
Okay. So my question then is, I was wondering, so you have a 5-member parole board, and with the overcrowding that Nebraska has been experiencing, and the kind of the focus on trying to reduce that overcrowding, it seems that parole is going to become more and more part of that solution, right? Do you think the 5-member board moving forward is going to have the capacity as the need grows, or do you foresee that the board may grow at some point?
I think, I'm only saying this for myself, I'm a hard worker, and I think 5 board members will be making those decisions as to those individuals that are coming out. As we grow, we will continue to maintain. What I will say to you is that right now I have been looking at other options and have come to some conclusion with some options, and basically 2 board members, whether we split 2 and then 3, one person may be one place, along, which will probably be me, but basically that's how I plan to make sure that everything's covered as we move forward. What I will say to you is if we do decide and more people are paroled, what we'll be looking at is probably adding more parole officers to be able to maintain the services and supervision in the field. But as far as board members, because it's a constitutional of 5 board members, I think 5 board members will be 5 board members at this point. I don't know what's going to happen way, way, way down the road, but I think I'm a very conservative person, so I think we work with what we have until we cross that bridge, and then kind of work and plan on that as we transition accordingly. That's a very good question, because that is something that we're in the process of looking at, but right now we're trying to plan on as many people as we can that are good candidates, transitioning accordingly so that they can get what they need in the community. Very good questions, but I wouldn't expect anything less than from professors. And thank you.
Hi, do inmate work jobs count as a program to you guys or not? Like if they're part of the laundry team or the floor cleaning team or the kitchen team?
That's a good question. And I will say to you, I myself would think of it as a program. And one of the things that I will say to that, because that is work ethics. So if they can work and do what they're supposed to do, they are building up what they need to transition so that they can have that same work profile or work ethic when they parole. So we do consider that. And I think it's important because when they don't work, when they're supposed to, they can be given a misconduct report for not showing up to work because that's part of their job, or that may be part of what they're supposed to be doing while they're at the particular facility. And that's always good questions, because a lot of times individuals don't think that working in the prison is important. It's just as important, because if you can get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to the kitchen to make sandwiches, then you might be able to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to McDonald's or go to a factory and work and know that you can get up on time and get to work on time. So that is very, very important. Good question. Any other questions? Yes.
We'll get
How do you handle cases where offenders are almost textbook from their deviance? Like they grew up in an area where they might have not had a meal at like normal meal times every day, maybe one meal and didn't get a meal. Grew up in a neighborhood where they were surrounded by violence and crime, and so their life in prison is almost better. Meals every day, shelter, that kind of thing. How do you handle an offender who continues to reoffend because maybe their life in prison might be better? How do you handle paroling that?
Believe it or not, we have some of those individuals. And the way I see it is that if they are taking the program that they need while they're in prison, and once they are parole eligible or closer to their parole eligibility date, they may be 2 years out from their parole eligibility date. And we need them to transition, to change that mindset. And some of those programs that they may have completed while they're there may help them do that. I think they're going to be good candidates for transition. Resources are very, very important to parole administration and to the parole board, because if there are not resources for them, then we're setting them up for failure. But 9 times out of 10, they have the resources or will have the resource to transition. Once they parole or once they transition to work release and they're able to find a job, some of them now are actually getting their own places prior to parole. They work with the parole officer on the rest of those resources to help them change that mindset. And as you stated, the same mentality while they're incarcerated, don't think that may be the same mentality when they transition. It is our hope that the programming that they're involved in while they're inside will help them change. But change comes with time. Change comes with time, and we have to be patient with them. So as long as we're patient with them, long as we're providing the tools that they need, long as we're providing additional resources for them to have once they transition, I believe that they can change when they get out and will say, I don't ever want to come back to something like this again. Because we're not going to parole them to an environment that's not going to be conducive to their needs anyways. That's the hope of reentry, and that's the hope of the parole officer helping them adjust to where they need to be. And if they run into a snag and run into a problem like that, the parole officers will work with them and pull them back in and say, hey, what it is that we need to do to help you, readdress some of the things that you did not maybe inside. We will provide those programs for them in the community so that they can readjust. That's an excellent one, because I think most of the times it's hard for them to change. And one of the things that I struggle with is, guess what? They don't have enough time to change. They may only be doing 8 months. And the same thing that you just described, it's going to take years for them to change. But guess what? Some time is better than no time. Unless you just totally have some bad behaviors in the prison system and you just are not interested in parole, then guess what? You just will not be paroled. But you got to show us and provide us with the things that you have learned while you were there so that we can have something to work with. I always like to say, let us help you. Because we're going to do the best we can to transition you so you can get away from that mindset. And it's not easy. I know it's not easy for them, but at the same time, we have to give them the benefit of the doubt and work with them so that they don't come back to prison. Recidivism is huge. And when you don't provide them with those tools and the resources that they need once they transition, then we're looking at them to come back. And that's what we're trying to avoid. I think for years and years and years, because we only had certain programs, we only had certain resources, there was pieces that were missing. And now we're trying to come full circle to be able to provide certain components and certain things that these individuals are going to need in order to be successful. And we're still working on that. It's going to take some more time, but I see some light at the end of the tunnel. But I just want to believe that we are going to be able to provide many individuals with those services and resources that they need in order for them to be successful. I think that's a key. Anything else?
Going once, going twice.
Well, I'm going to be across the hall for a while anyways.
Oh, here's a question here.
How do you handle a lot of the offenders that, or individuals that don't have a lot of money? You know, I know you talked about getting them jobs, but, you know, they might not have, you know, any money saved up. And so how are they going to, you know, feed themselves until they can work enough to get money? How are they going to pay their electricity bills, you know, security deposits, stuff like that?
Well, I will say to you, if they have the sentence structure that I've been mentioning most of the afternoon, they will basically be transitioned to work release and go out and get a job and save money. And that's going to depend on their sentence structure. From there, they will transition, and the parole officers will work with them on those resources that are available in the community for them. A lot of these individuals, believe it or not, I have not touched base on, is transitional living facilities. Those transitional facilities, which is part of that whole reentry process that these individuals will parole to, because they don't have those individuals that's going to help them support mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers that can, or family members that can help them. So they'll parole to a facility, a transitional facility that will help them build and be able to prioritize some of those goals that they need in order to be successful. I think it's huge for them to recognize that they don't have all this prior to transition, because many individuals think that they can walk out the door within nothing and basically be successful. And I think they're learning that this cannot take place unless they have that particular support system or a place where they can parole to be able to get what they need while they're in the community and save money. I think a lot of them are starting now. We actually changed basically how we paroled people about a year ago. We would not parole individuals unless they had a place to stay. Now we're paroling people pending a residence verification, so that if they want to go out and get their own home, their own apartment, and they're on the work release program, and they have saved money for that purpose, we're allowing them to do that. And that basically sets them up, to me, in my opinion, for independency, and that they don't have to depend on anybody other than themselves, which means that they're going to have to work in order to pay their rent and that sort of thing. That's been very, very successful for us, for these individuals who have the time to be able to work a little bit, save them some money, and then be able to have their own apartment and then pay their rent while they're in their electricity and that sort of thing. Any other questions? A lot of good questions. I always like to try to get as much information as I can and then save the questions for last, because I can go on and on and on and on, and then there wouldn't be time for questions. So I'm glad a lot of things are coming up in reference to some of the things that these individuals will have to do or can do once they transition to the community. And that transition piece is huge for me, because without that transition piece, what I don't want to see is these individuals coming back. So we need to have that piece and give them the opportunity to transition accordingly, whether it's work release or whether it's parole, again, depending on that whole sentence structure.
Well, I'll ask one more,
Sure.
but this is a loaded one.
Okay.
Politics. How does the political environment impact the parole board in your decision-making?
It does not. I'm speaking for myself.
All right.
It does not. We are a discretional board. The board makes the decisions as to who is considered, who is ready, and who needs transition. And I speak like that only because what happens is you'll have individuals who feel, and this is not so much even political, this is in general. You'll have individuals that feel that John Doe is ready for parole. But based on the fact that there are a lot of things that are considered to be confidential, there are certain things we can't share. And because of that, John Doe just may not be a good candidate today for parole. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next day, or next year rather. But those are the kinds of things we have to take into consideration when we're trying to parole individuals. So I just will speak for myself and say, politics do not play a role in decision making. I will say that it's important for us to make the best decision that we can when it comes to paroling the best candidate in lieu of public safety. Because a lot of people think that politics get in the wind, but no, we're a discretionary board, and we basically base our decisions off exactly everything that needs to be done prior to this individual transitioning to parole.
Thank you. Follow-up thought.
Okay.
So can the governor can't tell, like with the crackdown on drug offenses and stuff like that, no one can tell you guys that you have to be harder on drug offenses than other offenses or anything like that?
No. Again, we have a very, very good board, and we make really, really good decisions. When you look at drug offenses, when you look at violent offenses, when you look at all those things, you have to have some common denominator. You have to know exactly what it is we're looking for in order for this person to be successful. Because if you really think about it, you used to hear 15 years ago, everybody needs to be locked up. All the drug offenders, all the people that commit, alcohol offenses just need to be locked up. And look at us now. Across the country, the prisons are overcrowded. It's not just Nebraska, it's across the country. Where did we go wrong? Where did we go wrong? And I speak for myself, what I think is now we have an opportunity to provide individuals with the treatment that they need in order to prepare them for transition. And that's if they want it. Because many of these individuals have been assessed for programming, and that's what we're going to do. So if I can make sure that I am making everybody do what they're supposed to do while they're incarcerated, guess what? They are preparing themselves for transition. So we shouldn't have to worry about anybody basically saying what you have to do. Because I will say that individuals who are incarcerated and who deserve to be transitioned, your way of thinking that a person should be transitioned and deserve is going to be different than mine, because I get to see the big picture. People on the outside only gets to see a part of the picture, because I've had access to the file, I have access to the crime, I have access to any type of opposition that's going to come before us. I have information on all that. Everybody on the outside does not have information on that. So as I speak, those individuals that have prepared themselves for transition, those individuals are going to be transferred. Now, one thing I will be corrected on is that not all those individuals that I just explained are going to get the votes to parole. Again, it's a discretionary board, and board members are going to vote the best way they see it. Each board member have a way of looking at the case individually, and at that hearing, we make that decision to parole the individual. So not anybody could just say, hey, yeah, you need to let 15 people out, or you need to let 100 people out. It's hard to do that because we don't know what those 100 people, what that consists of. But I will say to you, speaking for myself, parole the best individuals that deserve parole, that have prepared themselves with transition, keeping in mind that there's a possibility that victims may show up at that hearing, because that's important. Good follow-up question.
Another one.
Yeah, so you were stressing them transitioning and putting, pressure on them being able to get out. So I'm wondering, just with housing and transitional housing conditions, availability, what does that look like in the state of Nebraska? Is that a growing concern for the state?
It's gonna always be a concern because a lot of individuals that are paroling, depending on the timing, we may run into a problem. Do they have bed space? That's going to always be a concern. We'd love to see more grow in the community, but at this particular time, those kinds of things are taken into consideration. We parole them pending bed space availability. So they will parole as soon as the bed space comes open. They'll go right straight to that particular facility, or they may find another facility in the transition. And then at that particular time, the board will take into consideration whether that's a rescission hearing to go back through to make sure that the place that they're going to go to now has been approved and accepted. We will work on that accordingly. We will always have problems with transitional facilities that need more beds. I mean, I think that's just a given, that we need to have more places that's going to be able to help some of these individuals as they transition. That's huge.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.